Dr. Kaufman, the floor is yours for an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So I wish to raise concern over several aspects of research funding in Canada that fall under the rubric of diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, sometimes known as EDI. The main point that I wish to make is that DEI, as practiced by the Tri-Council Research Councils, reflects a particular worldview. It's a left-wing worldview that I term cultural socialism. That's a valid worldview, but it's a particular worldview. Cultural socialism, as I define it, consists of two tenets. The first is DE, or diversity and equity. This means that rather than, say, equalizing outcomes by class, as in traditional Marxist socialism, outcomes should instead be equalized by race and sex through a form of discrimination. The second component of cultural socialism is inclusion, or I, that minority groups must be protected from emotional harm, what's known as emotional safety, or protection from emotional trauma. What this means is that this requires a censoring of free speech and the pursuit of truth, because this might offend. This aspect of DEI is what underpins what is commonly known as cancel culture. So my point here is that DEI is political. It's not neutral. And just to prove that, when I asked a representative sample in a Maru survey of 1,500 Canadians in September 2023 whether they approve of flying the pride flag on government buildings, those who identified as left of center approved 63-24, while those who identified as right of center disapproved 74-15. Moderates also disapproved by a more modest 42-35. The point here is that
He froze up a little bit there.
He's frozen on my screen. I don't know if anybody can hear
DEI
me.
question. Okay. Evident in both diversity statements on application forms and race and sex discrimination in hiring and funding calls. I'll make 3 points about DEI. First, most Canadians do not support it. I found that 59% of Canadians favored a colorblind approach of, quote, combating racism by treating people as individuals and trying not to see race, as against just 29% in favor of the color-conscious approach of, quote, combating racism by being aware of race in order to better notice inequalities. It's worth saying also in the U.S., a majority of people, including a majority of Black and Hispanic respondents, support the Supreme Court decision banning racial preferences in university admissions. So the second point is that DEI is in tension with research excellence. Richard Sander in 2004 famously showed that admitting Black students to law school with lower entrance scores correlated with them achieving lower grades in law school. And that's not surprising if you're admitting at a lower score. More recently, I looked at data from an article in Nature in 2024 of academics. It showed that female academics had significantly lower numbers of citations in their work than men, even when controlling for field of study and years in the profession. Likewise, Black and Hispanic scholars had substantially fewer citations than whites or Asians, although the gap was not as large as for gender. Now, whatever is the cause of this, arguably there may be inequalities in society, that's absolutely right, or inequalities earlier in the pipeline, but artificially narrowing the talent pipeline by rigging the result at the end of the pipeline does not rectify the problem. All it does is prioritize equity or cultural socialism over excellence. The third point is that DEI creates the conditions for delegitimizing research funding. Confidence in higher education in the United States has fallen from nearly 60% in 2015 to 36% in 2024, nearly in half. The sharpest decline is amongst Republican voters from 56 to 20%, nearly by a third, dropping to a third of its former value. In Canada, the trust in higher education is greater, but it's also at risk. For instance, in my survey, I find that just 49% of conservative voting Canadians trust social science and humanities professors compared to 69% of those supporting left or liberal parties. Now, that 49% is higher than the 34% amongst Republicans for the same question in the US, but it shows that when a sector starts to be seen as partisan, it will lose the confidence of those on the other side of the political divide. Consider that a quarter of conservatives now trust the media, and that's approaching US levels. And support for established institutions such as the CDC.
That's our
is
time.
in
You'll have a
decline.
chance to elaborate through the questions. Thank you for joining us, and you have the floor for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to members of the committee. It's a pleasure to appear before you today. Every year, the federal government of Canada spends billions of dollars on research funding. Canadians expect, and rightly so, that this money will be allocated to the most deserving researchers based on excellence and excellence alone, in order for them to pursue high-quality research that will benefit Canadians. Sadly, this is no longer the case. Today, federal research funding is often allocated on the basis of race, sex, ideological conformity, and other criteria that have nothing to do with the pursuit of truth and excellence. For example, we have federally funded Canada research chairs that are only available to people of a certain race or of a certain sex or a combination of both, even though none of these characteristics have anything to do with the quality of someone's research. Indeed, under plans announced by the Government of Canada, universities will lose their funding under the Canada Research Chair program unless they meet diversity requirements in recruitment, which means that people are no longer being hired solely because of their race. We also have federally funded research programs which, I quote, expect applicants to clearly demonstrate their strong commitment to EDI in their applications, unquote. EDI being, of course, equality, diversity, and inclusion, as well as to integrate the EDI into their research practice and research design. With respect, the purpose of research design is to enable good research to be done. It is not to promote specific ideological objectives, such as EDI. In addition, there are many informal obstacles to the pursuit of excellence within the federal funding system for research. For example, in the humanities and social sciences, where I come from, it is well known that research proposals that contain buzzwords and a fashionable progressive political language have a much better chance of being successful than proposals on more traditional subjects which use more traditional approaches and which do not contain buzzwords. This means that from the beginning of their careers, young scholars and researchers are being taught that the way to get ahead in academia is to be a conformist, is to chase grant money using buzzwords, regardless of what they actually think is intellectually valuable. Now, I speak to this committee as a former recipient of federal research funding through SSHRC. Without this funding, I would not have been able to pursue my academic career, which has taken me to different countries, and for this, I'm very grateful. Naturally, I am a strong believer in the value of investing public money into research. However, in these difficult economic times, many Canadians already question the value of funding academic research, which can seem sometimes irrelevant to their daily lives. And the heavy-handed imposition of EDI and other ideological requirements in research funding undermines public support for public research funding. And that is something that needs to be urgently addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.